Hi everyone, it's Amy here from the blog I Think Therefore I Teach. Welcome to our first Mark With Me. In today's Mark With Me, I'm going to go through one of my students' answers from last year's Philosophy of Religion exam who achieved the A star. So let's have a look first of all at the questions. The questions were as follows, and the one that we're going to start with is the first one. Number one, the best approach to understanding religious language is through the cataphatic way. Discuss. So let's see what my student wrote. The cataphatic way is one of a number of methods of understanding religious language. Both Aquinas' ideas on analogy and Paul Tillich's ideas and symbols fall into this category. However, it is up for debate whether either of these methods better our understanding of religious language or whether they are just ways of making it more vague. Understanding something requires a base level of prior knowledge in order to fully grasp it, and since we have none of this about religious and theological truth, our understanding of them is hindered, although it could be the case that the cataphatic way allows easier access to the unknown. Now, what you can see from this introduction, whilst it is quite long, you have that critical tone already being established. The idea here that, however, it is up for debate whether either of these methods better our understanding. That is a critical tone that's being established. So the student is saying that there's a question surrounding whether these two methods, Paul Tillich and Aquinas, so the student has rightly recognised that Aquinas' analogy and Tillich's symbols are both parts of the cataphatic approach, but then he's questioning whether these are the best, but then rounding off with they may allow us easier access, but not necessarily the full truth. So let's see where they go from here. One approach of the cataphatic way that intends to improve our understanding of religious language is analogy. Aquinas, a Franciscan monk and theologian, is a proponent of analogous language as a means of understanding truths about philosophy. He argues that analogy is the best method of understanding religious language because it allows humans to use their own clear experiences in order to shape an image of God. While this is true of analogous language, it falls short of improving understanding, since the ignorance we have to God is so potent that it is unrealistic to assume he shares our attributes. However, to counter this, Aquinas used the term via emensia, through eminence, which means that any attribute we give God is not in the sense that a human might have it, but in the eminent sense, meaning that God both is and has the attribute. For instance, if God is loving, he is loving to everything at once, since he is love in itself. However, although the eminence idea does excuse God for being even or overwhelmingly mysterious, it still tells us nothing more about him. So if we go back to the previous page, what you can see here is a very, very nice structure. You have a little bit of description here and then straight into something far more discussion-based. While this is true of analogous language, it falls short of improving our understanding. That's critical judgment there. So he's questioning whether actually, whilst this is what analogy wants to do, does it actually improve our understanding of God? And then he explains why it doesn't improve our understanding, because we already are ignorant about God's attributes and therefore cannot compare it to our own. However, he then counters this and talks about how Aquinas presents via emensia, but then he then further questions, how this via emensia works. So what you have here is you have a bit of explanation, a criticism, a counter-criticism, and then a further criticism. All of this then is structured evaluation. So let's see where it goes. So at this point we were, however, although the eminence idea does excuse God for being overwhelmingly mysterious, it still tells us nothing more about him. Linking Anthony Fleur's falsifiability argument, Aquinas' view on the immensity of God or religious truths is an overqualification. It almost seems as though Aquinas noticed the mysterious nature of God and added the immensity idea as a way of excusing God not being there, or as a way of consolidating a weak, unfounded belief in him. As Fleur said, Aquinas' cataphatic way proves that religious language dies the death of 1,000 qualifications, thus attacking the view that the cataphatic way is the best approach to understanding religious language. So what you have there is you have a further name, but this name, Anthony Fleur's argument, is not just dropped in as a valuation, because that isn't a valuation on its own, but what he's done is he's then applied it back to Aquinas to say how Aquinas falls into the issue that Anthony Fleur talks about, and therefore this renders it, going back to the question, not maybe the best approach to understanding religious language. So he's actually applying Anthony Fleur's argument here against Aquinas' view. In contrast to Aquinas' view, the apophatic way, founded by Pseudo-Dionysius and Maimonides is a far better approach to understanding religious language. Pseudo-Dionysius claimed that all humanity is in a cloud of unknowing when it comes to the truths about theology and religion. So he devised via negativa as a way of drawing closer to an improved understanding. He claimed that the only way of learning what God is was by acknowledging what he is not, and thus eventually coming to the truth. Maimonides backed up this idea in his analogy of the ship, where he notes everything that the ship is not in order to conclude it is a ship. This argument is far stronger than the cataphatic way, as it comes up with a logical basis of descriptive understanding while not taking anything away from God's mysterious and incorporeal nature. Brian Davies, an English philosopher, criticised this apophatic way by saying that outlining what something is not leads us no closer to what we're trying to discover. For example, if one were to say that something existed and someone else named everything they could in attempting to decipher the original object, they would be no closer to its actual nature. Although Davies' view is logically sound, he is missing the purpose of via positiva. The mystery of religious truths is prevalent in via positiva, since it would be no accurate method of coming to understanding, but is accepting this fact. The apophatic way allows us to be, not sure what that is, on religious language and overcome a barrier of prior understanding so we can come to at least some basic truth of God. Therefore, the apophatic way is a better approach to understanding religious language than the cataphatic way. Now, what you have here is very, very good control. He has brought in the opposite argument. He has gone from cataphatic way, which is what the question asked for, to the apophatic way, which is via negativa. That is now a massive risk, because unless you constantly link it back to the question and make comparisons, it would be seen as detail that isn't necessarily relevant to the question. But as you can see, he's actually backed up and explained what via negativa is. He's used language, if we go even further back, he's used language like in contrast to quite a sympathetic way, so he knows it's in contrast to it. And then he says, well, this argument is far stronger than the cataphatic way, and then backs up why. And so he's linking it back to the question. He's always aware of what the question is asking. He then criticises it with Brian Davies' arguments. Little mistake there about via positiva instead of via negativa. But again, an examiner is a positive marker, so I wouldn't knock the student down for that, because actually the description of it is it's still spot on. And all the way through he's then explained why the apophatic way is therefore better than the cataphatic way. So it's constantly still with the question in mind. It's constantly still comparing it to say why this approach is actually better than Aquinas's analogy approach. So let's see what the final section is of his answer. However, the cataphatic way's other main idea, symbol, is a strong idea for the best approach to understanding religious language. See how the student brings it back to the question, using the words of the question, he makes his argument clear, he gets off the fence, he's saying that it is a strong ideal. He's once again using the cataphatic way, and using, however, it shows that it's going to be different from the argument he's just said. Richard Dawkins, an English zoologist, notice how the student always gives a little bit of detail about who the person he's talking about is. So English zoologist and popular atheist, like Franciscan monk Thomas Aquinas, or Brian Davies, an English philosopher. It sets the scene of who these people are. An English zoologist and popular atheist submits to the view that symbols great meaning beyond words, leading us into Paul Tillich. Paul Tillich, a British philosopher, argues that symbols open up a wider understanding that was previously closed off. In other words, Tillich believes that symbols can go beyond our basic human understandings of the world and allow for further cognition into whatever lies beyond. For example, the crucifix. Tillich claimed that not only do symbols have great personal and ideological meaning, but they also participate in what they represent, making them separate from other imagery. This view on symbols is a very effective method of improving understanding. This is because symbols, by their very nature, are undeniably ambiguous, while at the same time being clear and present. They represent something on a sophisticated level beyond the bounds of human action and senses. Symbols also simply accept that the mystery of God, since they focus on the personal and spiritual understandings rather than physical knowledge. From there to there, that is all very, very effective and well justified evaluation. The student has explained what symbols are, talked about the participation argument. The language that's used is very sophisticated, given examples. Just examples can be explained, etc. But when you're on a tight time frame, you've got to just give the bits of information that you can. But then all of this justifies why symbols work, and it's a very sophisticated answer because it isn't just your general usual strengths and weaknesses. It really does get into the depth of why the student thinks that symbols do work. To conclude, while the apophatic way holds water, the cataphatic way dominates as best approach to understanding religious language. Where analogy fails, symbols take on a simple yet effective place as a means of obtaining understanding of religious truths. Very, very nice conclusion. He's got both of his arguments in there, cataphatic and apophatic. He said that apophatic, does hold some water, so does hold some value. However, the cataphatic way does dominate the best approach. Then keep back to the question, answering the question, he said that analogy fails, but then where analogy fails, symbol wins. Symbol is the way of obtaining that understanding and truth. This answer got 15 out of 16 and 23 out of 24, so we dropped 1 mark in each of the areas. So hopefully from this answer you'll be able to see where that student gained and how that student gained those marks in those areas, how he answered that question, how he engaged with it, how he manipulated the information that he knew, so he wasn't just regurgitating content but really looking at, analysing what it means. I'll be doing a number of these videos going through the different answers from the rest of this paper, and then I have a few papers for ethics and for Christian thought and some from the first year as well. So keep your eyes open on the blog and YouTube for following Mark with Me's. Thank you ever so much everyone for listening. Bye for now.